Starting out in life, it was pretty clear that I was going to have to get a job. I looked around and there was a job for a fast food waitress. I applied and I got it. It was right across the street from high school. I was the worst fast food worker you have ever run into. First of all, I'm kind of slow and dreamy. I don't like doing things quickly. I don't like being pushed. More than that, I was stick skinny. And I would see these overweight people coming in and ordering, 3 pastrami sandwiches and that's an exaggeration, but and a milkshake and order of onion rings. And I'd think, oh, you don't want to eat that. I would want to just tell them, order something else, but you can't. And so I was always in a dilemma being a fast food waitress. And I remember one day this man came in and he said, nobody should be working and feeling that miserable. He took every bit of change he had in his pocket. He laid them on the counter and he said, here, quit your job. And I was like, everything I feel tended to end up on my face. Well, in the next half an hour or so, my boss came by and fired me that day. I was so miserable. It took me a while to even be able to recover from that enough to go to God. And I said, God, what am I going to do? I mean, I'm such a loser. I can't even work at a fast food restaurant. I started to fast and pray. As a Christian, sometimes when we really don't know what to do, we fast. And when I fasted, especially in those days, even today, I went on a water-only fast for about 3 days. But one day I was walking through our kitchen. I heard an audible voice. It said, teacher. It was a male voice. Teacher. And I thought, who was that? I was the only person in the house, and I thought, well, this is crazy. What's this? So I figured it must be God, and I thought, okay, well, I'll be a teacher. That was the beginning of my teaching career. One day, the lady who had owned the fast food restaurant came in to bring her son. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and you could tell both of us weren't sure of how this was going to go. And she said, well, I'll let him come. He was an older student who needed care after school. So she said, well, I'll give him a try. He had been a rather difficult kid. But through a series of things and prayer, I got his respect. He knew I cared about him. It was about, 6 months, and his mother caught me after school one day when she was picking him up and said, you know what? You were absolutely the worst fast food worker we've ever had, but you are a wonderful teacher. It turns out that there were a lot of difficult kids that I got to work with who made turnarounds, and it was really a very satisfying thing. One year, I was teaching in a district where half the kids had come from LA and were largely minority. Usually had parents that had somewhat professional jobs. And then we had Orange County parents, so it was an unusual mix of people. I had to teach 5th graders who were very, very different from each other. There was a lot of suspicion and a lot of mistrust, and it was a strange year. We had a textbook, and there was a lot of technical scientific terms. We were teaching sea life, tail flukes and baleen and dorsal fins and all kinds of technical, whale terms. A lot of the kids didn't really get those terms. When we gave the test, they bombed that part of it. I got a 12-foot paper mache whale, chicken wire, and fashioned it into a whale at the back of the room. I would say, okay, you and you, go paint the dorsal fin. I would use the terms that I wanted them to know. Then at the end of the year, when I gave the test, there were only like 2 kids every year that wouldn't get it. Almost everybody would get it. I had a room mother, just an amazing person. In the course of things, she helped me on so many things that year. I had a student named Ronnie, and he was a computer genius. His dad, I don't know who he worked for, but he knew everything about computers, which he had taught his son. I would sometimes have like situations that I didn't know how to handle with my computer. And so I'd let Robbie help me with stuff. And sometimes I'd let him input, like setting up the program, not putting grades in, but setting up, how to do the program or something, because I was pretty helpless in those ways. And then I would go to use it and find out he'd lock me out. And I'd say, hey, make it so I can get in. And he'd laugh and I'd laugh and he'd let me in. And I would have to find alternative work for him because everything we were working on was so far below his level that it was just comical. She and I would talk, culture and things we enjoyed and all of that. And she was a Pierce Brosnan fan and I was a Mel Gibson fan. She had her favorite actor. I had my favorite actor. We would, just laugh about that. Her husband worked on race cars and would go out to, Willow Springs. And somehow Mel Gibson was involved in that whole scene. And he met him and knew him and discussed with him that his wife had a teacher who would really like to meet him and set up for a time for me to, be introduced to him. And it was supposed to be really wonderful. And she thought I would be pleased, and I was horrified. Said, the last thing I want to do is meet Mel Gibson. I said, I enjoy his movies, but, what are we going to do? I must say, I like your movies, and he's going to say, okay, I've never heard that before. I mean, she thought she was doing something that would really please me and make me excited, and he was going along with it because I'm sure he gets this all the time. I said, oh no, I don't want to meet him. And so she had her feelings hurt by that. And that situation again today, I might have gone through with it and just put up with it. But I knew he wasn't going to want to do it, and I wanted to do it about as little as he wanted to do it. Anyway, that was strike one. But despite that, 10 years after her daughter was in my classroom, her daughter got married, and they invited me to the wedding in a very nice restaurant in Redlands, and it was charming, just charming. She had good taste. Before the wedding, I saw many of my former students. We got to talk, and we heard, what are you doing and how are things going? And this Ronnie, who had been such a computer whiz, told me how he was working for a comic book company. And I said, okay, did you go to college? And he said, no. And I said, oh, well, that's a real waste. Ronnie, I think you should go to college. He goes and sits down, and they have the ceremony. And every time I looked over at him, he was sitting there ruminating and just thinking deeply. I thought, we had the reception, and he went out of his way to come over to me. And he said, do you think I should quit my job and go to school? He said, I make 185, I think it was some huge sum. I'm going to say 185,000. I don't remember how much it was, but it was so far above my salary. It wasn't even funny. No, I don't think you should quit your job and go to school. Usually college is a path to getting a good job. I said, no, you've hit the lottery already. It really amazed me, the power that I had in his life. Oh my goodness, me and my great ideas. He's doing quite well without having gone to college. People don't have to go to school to learn about subjects. So it was really quite moving to see that students who we'd left each other's lives for many years would care enough to have me back in their life. It was lovely. Thanks for listening.